My game is called Birdshot. And the whole point of Birdshot is you are a bird. Let me get right into it. You're a bird, and you're Birdie McFeathers, and you fly around, and your job is to crap on people. So you you fly around, and you drop bombs on people. Boom, and you hit them, and then the better the target, the more points you get. So the whole point of this is to time and release your bombs, so they drop down and they hit stuff, and you've got all these different mechanics that work into that. It's a mobile game, and you play on your phone, so you swipe left and right to make your bomb go where you want it to go. Here's a kind of a concept piece that I put together, and you'll be flying over the city, and then you'll release a bomb. It'll go flying down, and you'll have to go in between, swiping left and right. You'll have to go in between these buildings and then aim for something, and then pick your target. As you fly down, you get closer and closer, and you got to decide: are you going to go for the car? Are you going to go for a person? Are you going to go for a food truck? Are you going to try to land on the hot dog that somebody's eating? Or are you going to get this guy? You get this guy, so then you rack up the points. So if we go back, and we go back to the overview, and this is what's called a Razor statement here. This has all the information about what the game is. Very simple. Everything you need to know is in this. And it's called the Razor statement because it helps you cut through all the arguments. And if you say, okay, do we have to have complicated traffic in this game? Maybe not, because that's not the point of this. The point of this is to play as the bird and to hit things and everything. So it helps you make your decisions. So a Razor statement is really important, and you can refer back to it. As the game gets more and more complicated and you introduce more and more things and you forget what you were making originally, you can go back to this, and then you can figure out, what was it that we were trying to make? Oh, yeah. Because after about a year working on the game, you kind of forget what you started it on. And there was a question? Yes?
In the game, you can upgrade your bird or the group?
Yeah, you can. Well, I'm going to have different birds. Yeah, there'll be different birds. Yeah, I actually get into some of the features in a few minutes. So one of the things you have your controls on how to control, and I talked about it. Very simple, tapping and swiping. So this is kind of a typical pitch of what you're doing. So what you're seeing so far in all these slides with Birdie is just like a typical pitch that you're going to give to somebody. And then you want to detail some of the challenges. What are the challenges that go into this game? Well, the buildings are going to be something I have to avoid. I have to avoid airplanes. I have to avoid umbrellas and potentially other birds that are going to get in my way. Player feedback is super important. So what's the player? And what I'll do is I'll make this stuff available to you guys. I will give it to somebody, hopefully, and then you guys can find it somewhere and check it out and maybe use it. If you want to base your own stuff on it, you can mess with this. So it's going to have all these different features, and these are going to be the main feedback features of the game. And what's my competition? So I did some research, and I saw what my competition was for this game. And there's something on Android, PC, and iOS. And those are the closest games to what I have going. But you can ask, what does my game have that these don't? And my game has the time slowing down, and it's more about going from really high to really small. And where did I draw some inspiration, or what do I want from my games that other games have? Well, I really like when you play Zuma, the sound effects and the music is really great in that. And then, of course, the character-driven stuff in Angry Birds is on point. You can't go wrong with that. So that is my pitch, right? So now that we have that as a reference point for what we're doing, we look at, and this is what I'm, like I said, this is your razor statement. This is what your game is about. And this will help you drive all the decisions. So you want to have this, and I'll keep referring back to this. So this will make your life 10 times easier, especially if you work on a big team. So where do you go from there? You got your razor statement, you've got your pitch. What's the next step? Well, the next step is your priorities, right? And if you look and you say, you want to break the game up into features. What features does this game contain? All of the features, everything I can think of. And then what you want to do is you want to say, I'm going to assign those features to an A, B, and C feature. What's the core functionality? What's the cool stuff I want to do? And what's the nice to have stuff? So you start with your A features, then you move to your C features, and then you go back to B. So the reason you start with A is because A is the easiest stuff, like what's the bare minimum that I need to make this game? And then B or C is the entire list, right? So you've already finished A and B. And C is somewhere in the middle. So then you just decide, okay, what is like halfway between these 2 points that is acceptable to me? And the A features are what's called your MVP, your minimum viable product. Your minimum viable product is what is the smallest version, the most stripped down basic version of this that can still be considered a game. Like if everything went horribly wrong, what do I need to have to still put it out there and then be called a game? And that's what's your minimum viable product. So if you look at all the features that go into Birdshot, I could do all this stuff. This is just a list off the top of my head when I was writing this of what could possibly go into this game. And you see there's a lot of interesting things that I want to do. You know, I want to have an original soundtrack, and I want to have 7 playable birds, and I want to have all these different cities, and I want to go from city to city to do this stuff, right? But I don't need all this stuff to make a very, very, very simple game. Like the different cities aren't needed right away. So they're not part of what's called your minimum viable product. So you take this big list that you've created, right? And you compare it against your razor statement or your game pillar. And then that helps you then take that and determine what your A, B, and your C features are. And so you can take that and you start breaking it up. You can see out of this thing back here, right? I took this, compared it to this, and then I have this. And this helps me figure out what I absolutely need, the most basic version of the game that I could possibly have, the next step from there, and then all the extra cool stuff that could go into my game. All the really neat stuff, achievements, time trials, leaderboards, voiceovers, people get screaming when they get pooped on. All these different birds, social media integration, just some really cool stuff, the original soundtrack. But I don't need that to prove that flying a bird and dropping bombs on people's fun, right? To prove that that's fun, this is all I need, right? And so when you're designing a game and you're starting a game and you might want to look to get funding for it or something like that, that's what you want to have. You want to have the A set, your minimum viable product, because then you've proved to them that it's fun. It's fun to do this. And so it's fun for people to engage in this, right? And there's more to it than just the bird. It's like, it's like a fun game. My idea was that this game is something that you play while you're waiting. You're waiting in the doctor's office. You're waiting for all this stuff. People are making you wait for things, and you're waiting in line. You play this game. You let off some steam. You let off some steam via making somebody else's day horrible. So that's the point, right? You feel crappy, and you're going to crap on somebody, and you're like, this is good. Right? So that's the idea. And so to prove that that's fun, to let off some steam is fun, I have my A features, and I take that to somebody, and they go, wow, this is fun. I could do this all day. And you're like, good, that's what I intended to do. but to keep it from getting boring, I move into my B features, and that will keep you playing. And then what keeps you the overall like playing the game from start to finish is C features. So now that we've got our A, B, and C features, we're going to move on to something called your key dates. And I think this is something that will probably be the most interesting to you or the most informative. And this was something that I had to develop myself over time. Nobody actually taught me this. I just learned from doing it the wrong way many, many times. Here are some of the most important key dates in a game cycle. And I will go on in through these individually. But I think if you write these down or you take a picture of them or whatever, and like I said, I'll make this available to everybody, that these are, and you work these in, you can understand where you need to be at any given time. So you start, like I said, you start with your design phase, you move to your proof of concept, and then prototype, and then you've got your minimum viable product in there, and then your first playable, and so on. But you want to know what you're going to be responsible for. You really do when you start. How is this going to be used? Because I've had times where I made my first playable, and then I gave it to the publisher, and they took it somewhere, and they showed it to somebody, and nobody told me that they were going to do that. And there's a lot of weird stuff when you're making the game that you're like, if you go right, everything looks great. If you go left, it looks awful and the game crashes. So you're like, let's not go left. When you start the game, so what is design phase? What is the pre-production? You might have heard design phase, pre-production, all that stuff. So pre-production is where you come up with all your ideas. You create your GDD, which is your game design document, your TDD, your technical design document. That's where the coders go in and say how they're going to make stuff and how they plan to do everything. Your VDD, which is your visual design doc. So basically, designers, coders, artists, they all have their master document, right? And then the producer, like me, goes in and makes the boring schedule stuff. And then then once you've got that, you've got the next phase, which is the proof of concept. And the proof of concept is you take all those features. Remember how I said you have between 3 and 5 features? You have those, and you put them in a sandbox all by itself, and you say like, prove that each feature is fun all by itself before you go and you add them all together. When I was working on Indiana Jones, we were working on the combat system, and I said we need to isolate just the combat. I just want Indiana Jones and 2 Nazis, and I want it. And when we can make it fun to just beat the crap out of Nazis in a room all by itself, then when we add in all the other stuff, it'll be even more fun, right? But it has to be fun to beat the crap out of Nazis. So what is your proof of concept? Your proof of concept is to have all these little satellites. So you guys are familiar with like Unreal and then Unity and stuff like that. And so you're familiar with like having different scene files and things like that, right? So what you want to have is each one of those scene files represents a little sandbox. And like in one sandbox, I would have, if I went back to the Indiana Jones thing, I'd have Indiana Jones beating the crap out of people. And then another one, Indiana Jones driving a car. And then another one, him using the whip, right? And so I have all these different things, and I prove that it's fun to use the whip, or driving the car, or fighting on a car on a moving platform. So I do all these things separately, but I don't put them together because I don't want to complicate it. I want to see if they're fun by themselves. And then I also want to see, like, I don't want to have anything break anybody else's stuff, basically. Because that's what we're going to do in the prototype. So you take everybody's stuff and you jam it all together, and everything breaks. And so that's what the prototype is. You jam everything together and you try to get all the proof of concepts to work in one big file all together and play nice together. So, question?
Yes, when you were talking about the scenes, the different scenes, would that be like developing or and trying, testing different mechanics, but on different different scenes?
Yes, like all by themselves. Or no, just basically if I'm working on using the whip and you're working on melee punching and beating people up, I can work on it in my own little thing without it interacting with yours at all. So if you change something, I don't come running over to your desk and go, ah, you broke my stuff. Like, because there's plenty of time for that. That's where that happens, right? So this is the time when you can work on stuff without worrying about breaking anybody's stuff. You can try anything you want, and it's free. It's a free time for you to just make it as fun as humanly possible without worrying about it. Because then later on, you have dependencies where you can't change stuff for fear of breaking somebody else's work. And you guys might have some exposure to that working in teams already.